House and the Senate in Tennessee has passed the anti-evolution monkey bill. They don't refer to it as monkey bill. To be fair, Think Progress refers to it as a monkey bill. But basically, it is legislation that will allow teachers to cover science in any way they want. So if they don't believe in evolution, they can question evolution and discredit evolution when they're teaching their students. If they want to talk about creationism, they're protected. They have immunity. They can talk about whatever they want. So this is something that the governor of Tennessee says that he is planning on passing.
Great.
He will sign the bill, and basically science will be destroyed in the state of Tennessee.
No, Anna, you're misstating this. It's educational freedom. Okay, and so I believe in this concept. I think that, for example, history professors should also have the educational freedom to teach history any way they like. So, for example, Anna, I believe the British won the American Revolution. Okay, and I want the freedom to be able to teach that. Mm-hmm. And if another history teacher believes that, in fact, the French or the Mongolians won the American Revolution, I believe he should have the freedom to teach that as well.
Right, they have complete immunity.
Yes, and if you try to limit that, Anna, you're just being, a liberal who is impeding upon liberty in America. Okay, you want to teach science as it's based on facts. Next thing you're going to want to teach math based on facts. Silly liberal.
It's amazing. Like, you take the Bible, and I get it. People have different interpretations of it, right? But then you take something as fact-based as science. There are no interpretations of it. It's fact. You can't make things up.
Yeah. Now, look, of course, their middle ground is, well, look, not everything is perfectly settled in science. So we don't know all the laws of the universe. We're trying, we've got our handle on some of them. And since we don't know everything, and scientists are actually by their nature incredibly conservative, not politically, but hey, they don't want to say anything is a fact until they're absolutely positively sure that it's a fact. They use that as a weakness. They're like, you see that? They're not sure. They're calling it a theory. And of course, the one I always come back to is the theory of gravity. If you're not sure that's a fact, jump out your nearest building and see how that turns out.
Now, there was a conference in 1980, all right? It was a big conference in Chicago where paleontologists, what do?
Study dinosaurs.
Study fossils. Dinosaurs are parts of that. All right. Geology, which is the rock layers. Geneticists, microbiologists, and evolutionists all got together at this conference and asked this question. Was whether the mechanisms underlying microevolution can be extrapolated to explain macroevolution. What that's saying is, can the small changes and variations we observe in nature, say the finch beaks, for example, that they show in textbooks today, different types of finch beaks, can we say that because we observe those finch beak variations, can we say that all life literally arose from a common ancestor? Is the mechanism good enough to account for that? Well, what does evolution mean? Does anybody know? Are you willing to take a shot? Yeah.
Isn't it change?
Change over?
Time.
Exactly. I like that. It's a good definition. All right, and life over time, these are textbooks. Evolution refers to the process through which species change over time. Okay, she just said that. All right, and biology by Campbell and Rees. Okay, it's another textbook. All the changes that have transformed life on Earth from its earliest beginnings to the diversity that characterizes today. All right, another textbook. Today, biologists use the term evolution to define cumulative changes in groups of organisms through time. The theory of evolution states that all organisms on Earth have descended from a common ancestor. What do you think that means?
We all came from monkeys.
No, beyond that. Well, not just monkeys, yeah.
That we all came from the same animal.
Yeah, we're all related. We all came from one common species. Charles Darwin says, it is truly a wonderful fact that all animals and all plants throughout all time and space should be related to each other. All right, we all came from a common ancestor. All right, so what does it mean to be a universally accepted theory?
Everyone in the universe accepts it.
No, not everybody in the universe accepts. Anybody else? Okay, basically, yeah, all scientists, most scientists accept the theory. Now, does anybody know of any universally accepted theories that have been proven not true? Yeah.
I was going to say Pluto being a planet, but then being changed to non-planet.
Yeah, they choose that. I mean, that was somewhat of a universal thought concept. But what about a universal theory that's true today? That's still true. A person in the other class said the Big Bang. Okay, I've looked into that. I've looked a lot into the evidence for the Big Bang, and I believe in it. I mean, I can't tell you how long ago it happened. It might have happened, 14 billion years ago. But I'll tell you what, the evidence is pretty overwhelming. Yeah. Gravity, yeah. Gravity's pretty true. Okay, theory of gravity is absolutely true. Okay, if you don't believe it, jump out of a building and see how that works for you. Okay. All right. Yeah. So that's not but you bring up a good point. There are people that say, "Oh, it's just a theory; it's not true." Well, that's not a good statement because, like you said, gravity's a theory, but we know that it works. Okay. We don't know maybe how it works all the time because quantum physics is changing our thoughts on that, but we know that gravity at least exists. All right. Hey, what about the Earth? Did we used to think the Earth was flat? Yeah, that was universally accepted. Now we know it's round. All right. So our evolution is kind of similar, okay? Today, Darwin's theory is almost universally accepted by scientists as the best available explanation for the biological diversity on Earth. Based on a large body of supporting evidence, most scientists agree on the following three main points. One, the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Two, organisms have inhabited Earth for most of that time. And three, all organisms living today evolved from simpler life forms. Okay? A prominent geneticist and evolutionary biologist puts it this way. He says, let me make crystal clear what is established beyond reasonable doubt and what needs further study about evolution. Okay? Evolution as a process that has always gone on in the history of Earth can be doubted only by those who are ignorant of the evidence or are resistant to evidence owing to emotional blocks or plain bigotry. So he's saying that you're either ignorant of the evidence or you don't believe in the evidence because of pretty much religious motives or any other motive that you can come up with, okay? He's saying that you're just resistant to it. But this is what he says. He goes, by contrast, the mechanism, okay, how life evolved, the actual mechanism of how it happened that brings evolution about certainly needs study and clarification. Okay, are you with me? All right? Now, if you glean the science textbooks and you look at the current contemporary Darwinist evolutionists out there today, you can come up with three main points. Okay, here's evolution in a nutshell. I'm giving it to you right now. Contemporarily, this is where it stands. Number one, biological evolution is a study that says organisms other than the first are descended from earlier organisms but with modification. Okay, that's the first point. All right, that all evolutionists agree upon. Number two, evolutionary history. This is the reconstruction of the universal tree of life. Has anybody heard of that before? Okay, this is like Darwin first drew this. Basically says, okay, if you start with a common ancestor at the bottom, and this is very simple, like the most simplest organism you can find, and over time it'll just get more complex and more species will branch off and branch off and branch off and branch. It looks like a tree. You with me? So you start simple at the bottom and you branch off into this big tree. All right. However, because of this tree, universal tree of life, this presupposes the thesis of common ancestry that says, yeah, okay, if we have evolutionary history and you can do this universal tree of life, then we must assume that we all came from a common ancestor. All right. Now, contrary to popular belief, biological evolution and evolutionary history was well established as some sort. They had some thought of it well before Darwin. Charles Darwin's contribution does not lie in point 1 or point 2. Rather, Charles Darwin's contribution lay in the mechanism, which is point 3. All right, this is what Darwin did. All right, he proposed a mechanism of how evolution works. Okay, and he says that evolution by natural selection, random mutation, will account for the diversity of life. Well, he said natural selection, but today they call it Okay, basically, let me step back. Darwin proposed natural selection. Since Darwin, scientists have realized that natural selection by itself will not account for all the diversity of life on Earth. And so now there's a new term, they call it Neo-Darwinism. This is a contemporary view that natural selections with mutations, which is like, you guys learned about mutations in biology class a little bit, like Siegel point mutations and such. With mutations and natural selection, then we can account for the diversity of life. Okay, so this is where they're at. They call it Neo-Darwinism, but that just means it's a contemporary view. All right. Another textbook says Darwin's theory of natural selection is a means of explaining how it happened. All right, so make sure you have these two separate. One says that it did happen, evolutionary happened. All right, and point 3 says how it happened. Okay, you with me? So one says it happened. Points 1 and 2 basically says that it happened. Evolution occurs somehow. Number 3 just says how it happened. All right, you with me there so far? Okay. So why are we debating this? Why is there debate in the science community at all? Well, first off, what's not debated is the change within a species. Okay, micro means small. So the change within a species is not debated at all. There's a ton of evidence that supports that. I mean, look at the effects of breeding. Okay, dog breeding, chicken. You know, you can try breeding different types of chickens. Okay, you might have different variations and types, but guess what? It's still a dog. Okay, you know, it's still the same organism. Okay, so we can see different adaptations on a small scale, and that's observed. Okay, and today nearly all biologists acknowledge that evolution is a fact. The term theory is no longer appropriate. I hope that Neil Campbell, when they wrote this, they were talking about microevolution. If that book's talking about evolution as a whole, then they need to scrap that statement. All right, I'll show you why here in a minute. So, but it does go on to say that it's not appropriate to say that that it could be no longer a theory, except when referring to the various models, okay, of how life evolved. So they're honest about that. The mechanism, we don't really know how life evolved necessarily. Okay. Now, to show you an illustration version, here's microevolution. Microevolution says that if you start with this type of lizard and it moves and it gets in this different type of environment, you know, it might change to a different color, maybe to fit its, you know, so it can survive better. It might go to a different place, and over time it might turn smaller. Okay, it might become smaller, larger, you know, different colors. Okay, those are variations, but it's still a lizard. Macroevolution states that over time that lizard will also turn into a bird. All right. I like to say it's kind of like the old fairy tale where the princess kisses a frog. What's it turn into? A person, a human being. You know, that's absurd. Do you guys actually think that could happen? Like if a woman walked over to a frog and kissed it, would you think that it would turn into a human?
Yes. The frog did that.
No, not at all. Okay, yeah, it takes some sort of magic. Basically, what evolution states, though, is not that. Okay, they're not claiming that, but they're saying over time, that frog or whatever it is that wasn't a human can sometime, you know, turn into a human being. All right. So let's look at these real quick. This is where we're gonna focus on. Does the fossil record provide conclusive evidence for the thesis of common ancestry? And number 2, in light of current biological research, does the evidence suggest that evolution by natural selection and random mutations account for the origin of species? Okay? I mean, if you were trying to look and find out if evolution occurred from a common ancestor, where would we go to look for evidence?
Fossils.
Fossils, yeah. That's like, it's most people don't realize that macroevolution is a historical science. All right, you can look at things in a lab, but really it's studying history because fossils give us evidence of the past. Okay? Now, before we can appreciate, or really talk about, I should say, the fossil record, we should appreciate how extraordinary of extrapolation it is to say we came from a common ancestor and how many fossils we should be seeing. All right, check this out. Suppose a textbook, and most textbooks do this, they'll say, well, we can show how the horse evolved. What they'll do is they'll show a little picture of a small horse and show how it evolved into a big horse. Okay, so if we could show the evolution of a horse, for instance, maybe we can say that that's how all life evolved. But keep in mind that the evolution of a horse from like one type of horse to another type of horse does nothing to show how a bat may have evolved into a whale. Okay? Okay, that's a lot bigger of a leap to go from a bat to a whale than a small horse to a big horse. But again, let's say for sake of argument that you could show that a bat evolved into a whale. Okay? Well, the first thing you might want to realize is that a bat and a whale are part of the same family, right?
Yeah.
What is it? Bat and whales are both what?
Mammals.
Mammals. They're both mammals. Okay? And mammals are just one subcategory right there in the chordates. Okay? So to show how a bat can turn into a whale really does nothing to show how a sponge turns into a bat. Okay? Have you ever seen a sponge doesn't look like much. How does a sponge turn into a bat? All right? Now, if that does not, show you how big of an extrapolation we're talking, get a load of this next slide. Everything that we just looked at can be located on that small little twig over there on the right labeled animals. Okay? Just animals. This is all life. This is, the three main domains of life. Okay? Everything we just looked at fits on animals. And notice to the right of that, plants. Just plants, okay? All the plants that have ever evolved from any other kind of plant fits on that one little twig. And that's just 2 twigs in the eukaryotes. For evolution to occur by macro scales, you still got to account for all the life forms that lived on Earth, and all of them had to come from a common ancestor. So we're talking billions and billions and billions of fossils. All right? There should be tons of fossils out there. Okay? And I'm just showing, to say that small little changes equals big changes, that's a huge, what they call extrapolation. That's why that's the central question of that conference. I mean, that's why they asked it. All right, so let's look into this a little bit. All right, evidence for micro or microevolution. This textbook says, Biology by Holt, okay, on page 252 says, the most direct evidence that macroevolution has occurred comes from the fossils. That's what you said back there. All right, change over time can be observed in this fossil record. All right, for instance, fossilized species found in older rocks are different from those found in newer rocks. After observing such differences, Darwin predicted that missing links between the great groups of organisms would be found. And this book even goes on to say that many of these links have been found. Okay? Another textbook says fossils are a window into the past. They provide clear evidence that evolution has occurred. All right? Now, what he's talking about those intermediate forms, means, okay, in that lizard example, you saw the lizard turn into the bird, right? Yeah. So what these intermediates mean is there's no fossils that show a half bird, half lizard, or something of that nature, okay? He said they're just not there, but maybe they will be found. This is what Charles Darwin said in 1859. This is the guy that wrote Origin of Species, okay, and basically changed the paradigm of thinking of how evolution happened. He said, why if species have descended from other species by insensibly fine gradations, do we not everywhere see innumerable transitional forms? Okay, where are those forms at? All right, in a later version of Origin of Species, written 10 years later, said, geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain. And this perhaps is the most obvious and serious objection which can be urged against my theory. All right, you with me? These transitional forms did not exist in Darwin's day. But look, that was in 1871. That was 1859. I mean, we're 100 years out. Surely they would have found some fossils since then. Well, David Raup, make sure I get his credentials right. Yeah, he's a paleontologist at the University of Chicago. All right. He wrote in a magazine, this is a journal, okay? This is a science journal. He said Darwin was completely aware of these missing transitional forms. He was embarrassed by the fossil record because it didn't look the way he predicted it would. Stephen Handling he's an American paleontologist and evolutionary biologist, all right, said, in fact, the fossil record does not convincingly document a single, not one transitional form from one species to another. All right? David Raup again said, in the years after Darwin, his advocates hoped to find predictable progression. In general, these have not been found, yet the optimism has died hard and some pure fantasy has crept into the textbook. Now I want to tell you something. This is kind of where this is where I have an issue. A lot of times I teach in public school. You're telling me there's fantasy in these textbooks? I mean, are we not hiring competent people to write these textbooks? How are you letting fantasy get in there? That's just, I feel like that's an honest question. All right? Stephen Jay Gould, perhaps one of the greatest paleontologists of our day. I mean, he's been passed for a few years. He also is an evolutionary biologist and a historian of science. He said the extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as a trade secret of paleontology. All right? So what does the fossil record show? Has anybody heard of the Cambrian explosion? The Cambrian explosion was, how they measure time in fossils is they say, okay, at the top level of layers of rock and whatnot are the most recent. As you go lower, you got the most farther away time of rock. Okay, the lowest ones are the farthest back in time. Okay, the Cambrian period is a long time ago. They say it was a really low layer of rock, happened around 500 million years ago. Okay, well, what happened? I'll skip to these first. Stephen Jay Gould said this about the Cambrian explosion. He said, the Cambrian explosion happened in a geological moment, and we have reason to think that all major anatomical designs may have made their evolutionary appearance at that time. Not only the phylum Chordate itself, but also its major divisions. Okay, he's saying that all the major anatomical designs, all the body plans that you see in nature today, the major ones all showed up really quickly at this Cambrian explosion. I've heard one science magazine say it's a big bang of biology. All right. Since the Cambrian explosion, no new phyla of animals have entered the fossil record. So he's even going as far as saying that no new phyla of animals has even entered the fossil record since that time. All right. And Richard Dawkins himself said, and we find many of them in an advanced state of evolution the very first time they appeared. All right. As if they were just planted there without evolutionary history. So check it out. Now look at this picture. What that's showing is that, well, tell you what, if we were to assume common ancestry and we were to take this graph out, okay, this would be our common ancestor way over here, okay? Check this out. This is your common ancestor here. And over time, this organism would get more complex, and the diversity would grow. There'd be a lot more diversity, and then finally you'd have a trilobite and all these different animals here. Okay, so again, the thesis of common ancestry says we come from something simple, and then we get to complex. But the fossil record shows it starts out complex. All right, you don't have to take my word for this. I mean, you can look. This is the way it is. Okay, the trilobite, for instance, is extremely complex. The eye of the trilobite is more complex than our own eye. Okay, you got all the chordates show up just randomly right here. Okay, just there. All right, this does not look like macroevolution to me. All right, so what does the proposed tree of life look like that's in the textbooks or that people propose? It looks kind of like that. All right, you start with a single cell organism and it branches off into the different. Hey guys, one more time I'm gonna have to kick you out of class. All right, not so much you, but more him. I don't know your name, but that's all I'm saying. All right, now this is the actual fossil evidence. All right, if you notice, there's a line that says Cambrian. Everything above that line happened after happened at the Cambrian or after the Cambrian explosion. Everything below that line is pre-Cambrian. Okay, check it out. All those dark lines represents the fossils. Do you see any fossils below that line except for those four little dark circles? No. And that's where Neo-Darwin theory needs to be. Okay, if you saw it on my computer, they actually fill in the dots, like they actually show you what the tree of life would look like. They draw a single dot and it branches off to kind of show you the contrast, but they're just saying those fossils aren't there even though it's supposed to look like this. And I mean, right here it says, according to the theory of universal common descent, part of Neo-Darwinian theory, the strata beneath the Cambrian rock should evidence many ancestral intermediate forms. Such forms have not been found for the vast majority of phyla. Okay? So this is the actual fossil evidence. Okay? So, Stephen Jay Gould says in Natural History, Volume 86, he says evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and the nodes of their branches. The rest is inference, however reasonable, not the evidence of the fossils. Do you know what that means, to be inferred? It's kind of like an educated guess, okay? But it's a big guess. If you're telling me that only data is at the tips and the nodes of their branches and you're inferring the rest of it, they ought to say that in the textbook, but they don't. Okay, I'm going to contrast this with the textbook in a second. D.B. Kitts, professor of geology at the University of Oklahoma, said, despite the bright promise that paleontology provides a means of seeing evolution, it has presented some nasty difficulties to evolutionists, the most notorious of which is the presence of gaps in the fossil record. Evolution requires the intermediate forms between species, and paleontology does not provide them. He said the fact that discontinuities are almost always and systematically present at the origin of really big categories is an item of genuine historical knowledge. Okay, remember, paleontology and geology is a study of history, the history of life on Earth. And he's saying that these gaps and these discontinuities is historical knowledge. All right, now let's go back to these textbooks. Remember, the textbook said the most direct evidence that macroevolution has occurred comes from fossils. Darwin predicted that missing links between the great groups of organisms would eventually be found. Again, they said many of these links have been found. Okay, the other one says fossils are windows into the past. They provide clear evidence that evolution has occurred. So let me ask you, does the fossil record provide evidence for cross-species or macroevolutionary change? What do you think? No. Not supported by the fossil record. Okay, if this textbook wants to say that, then they need to show me and show us how Stephen Jay Gould and all these other paleontologists are wrong. All right, now this is contemporary science. This is from the science journals. That's again why I have a little problem with this. However, does the fossil record provide evidence of variations, on a small scale? Yeah, sure, we can accept that. Okay, it is supported by the fossil record. Okay, so next question: how did life evolve? Okay, let's assume that we came from a common ancestor. Look, I'm fine with that. I mean, theological motives. Okay, if a person wants to deny that from theological motives, okay, that's fine. I know that the Bible says that God created man, but let's assume that we don't know, and let's say we follow science. Okay, let's just stay over here in the science realm. Let's assume that we did come from a common ancestor. My next question would be, okay, fine. How did it happen? Well, Neo-Darwinism is the mechanism. Okay, remember, natural selection acting on random mutation. Okay, that's what they said. So, is the mechanism of evolution by natural selection sufficient to account for the origin of species? All right, this is a big question. Well, let's look at HIV. All right, there's been a lot of study on malaria and HIV to understand this idea of mutations. Okay, why would we want to use something like HIV and bacteria as opposed to like working with living, say like fruit flies or like monkeys or whatever? Why would we work with HIV, do you think, instead? Yeah. Yeah, it mutates so fast. Okay, like let's say for a human being, let me try to make this point here. You guys were taught that in your like DNA section that you got like A, C, T, G, right? A bonds with T, C bonds with G. Did you guys learn that? Okay, and then every time if you take an A out and substitute with something else, we call that a mutation. Okay, that's a single point mutation. Every time, let's say you have a genetic code that says, okay, this genetic code codes for this protein that has a function. If you change one of those little bases, the whole function changes. Are you with me? Okay, so that's a mutation. Well, HIV virus mutates at what they call the evolutionary speed limit, 10,000 times faster than malaria. I don't have time to talk to you about how fast malaria mutates, but trust me, it's very fast. Okay, populations of malaria is huge, and they mutate fast. HIV, it also has a genome that's very small, so there's not as many letters to mutate. Okay, so you can mutate a whole lot really fast. So it's small size combined with a short reproduction time, 1 to 2 days. How long does it take? I mean, a human being, we got babies, but it takes like 8 or 9 months every time, okay, to have a reproduction. Viruses every 1 to 2 days. Okay, so that super rapid mutation rate, all mixed with a short reproduction times, means that every single nucleotide in HIV will mutate 10,000 to 100,000 times in every infected person every day. If you don't understand that, just take it from me. That's a lot. That's a lot of mutation. All right. So over the past several decades, every possible combination of up to 6-point mutations has occurred in HIV somewhere in the world. All right. If random mutation drives macroevolutionary change in organisms, then we should observe macroevolution in HIV virus. Okay. So all this is saying is HIV's mutated more than anything we could ever observe. Okay. It just mutates a ton. So if random mutation accounts for the change of a species into a different species, then we should surely see something like that with HIV. Well, what do the observations of HIV tell us? Well, HIV's ran the gamut of all the past possible mutations, and yet, with all these mutations, now this is a huge population. We don't have these type of populations in the world today. Of 100 billion viruses, no new cellular machinery has been created and no species has developed. HIV is still HIV. Okay? Look, HIV is good at surviving. it's good. It is good at surviving. It shows that variations, that type of adaptations. Okay, this proves to me microevolution. Okay, small changes, but really it shows the limits. It adds a large probability hurdle to say that okay, HIV can turn into something else because our humans, monkeys can turn to something else, or we can all come from some sort of a plant. Okay, it does not add to that thought. Okay, it actually puts a probability hurdle in front of it. All right. Now, I like how Francis Jacob put it. He's a geneticist. He wrote in Science that evolution is more of tinkering, not an engineering. Okay? He said evolution is good at tinkering with what we have, what's already there, but it's not going to engineer anything brand new. Okay? Nothing new, not completely new. All right? Colin Patterson, remember, former senior paleontologist at the British Museum of Natural History, one of the largest museums in the world, said, all my life I had been duped into taking evolution as revealed truth. Okay, it must be significant that nearly all evolutionary stories I had learned as a student have now been debunked. All right, he's the former president of the British Geological Association. This isn't Joe Schmo on the YouTube. All right, you can find 1,000 people on YouTube that want to fight against this stuff, but hey, you know what? This isn't me. This is actual science. Scientists that work at these museums that have their degrees in this stuff. And notice these are journals. These are scientific journals, peer-reviewed journals. Okay, so this isn't nonsense. All right, and again, read that comment. We are skeptical of claims for the ability of random mutation and natural selection to account for the complexity of life. Okay, they're saying they're skeptical. That needs careful examination of the evidence for Darwinian theory should be encouraged. Okay, they're saying we need to look at this evidence a little more clearly because the evidence of random mutation and natural selection is becoming very small to account for these changes. Every single one of those names right there were signed by scientists in the fields today, the major ones: evolution biologists, paleontology, geology, genetics, microbiology. These are scientists, okay? It's prevailing. It's starting to come out more that Darwin's theory, it was great for its time, but hey, you know what? We may need to do some more research into this to find out how it happened, because his theory may not be able to explain it. All right, so let's go back to this question. The central question of the Chicago Conference was whether the mechanisms underlying microevolution, okay, small changes, can be extrapolated, remember like I showed you in that tree diagram, to explain the phenomenon of macroevolution. All right, I'm going to continue the quote, because all I did was pause it. The answer can be given as a clear no. All right? This was back in 1980, okay? The opinion still stands today, and honestly, the more advances we make in genetics, and the more we understand DNA, and how cellular machinery works, and micro and macroevolution, the more we realize, man, there's something going on here. How in the world do all things evolve?